Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's ready for talks with the U.S. and is repeating some of President Trump's own statements about the war in Ukraine.
Over 2.5 years have passed since President Vladimir Putin began the war in Ukraine, and Russia appears no closer to victory. Each day drags him further from his ambitions and undermines the foundations of the country he professes he wants to restore to glory. In many ways, Putin has broken Russia himself. The countdown to the nation's collapse is underway, and time is running out for him. A superpower in trouble? How could Russia be on the verge of such a downfall when it remains a global heavyweight? The answer lies in Putin's catastrophic leadership, both on and off the battlefield, which has set the stage for a collapse from which Russia may never recover. The first cracks are visible in the economy. On the surface, it seems Russia is benefiting from the war in Ukraine. In April 2024, the BBC reported International Monetary Fund (IMF) figures suggesting Russia's oil exports had held steady, with high government spending fueling projected economic growth of 3.2% by the end of the year. Even 2025 looked relatively optimistic, as the IMF anticipated growth above an initially forecasted 1.8%. By comparison, the IMF predicted the UK would see just 0.5% growth by the end of 2024, making Russia appear to outpace certain European rivals. The hidden economic reality. However, these optimistic numbers fail to capture the financial turmoil within Russia. According to Swedish economist and former Atlantic Council senior fellow Anders Aslan, Russia faces significant technological, financial, and demographic hurdles that are poorly understood. He points out that Western sanctions shave 2 to 3% off Russia's GDP. This ongoing stagnation hampers Putin's ability to fund the war in Ukraine. Aslan also notes that Russia's GDP has fallen from $2.3 trillion in 2013 to $1.9 trillion today, with the decline beginning right after Putin annexed Crimea. It gets worse. Aslan cites hidden inflation rates of 9.1%, while interest rates have soared to 19%. Russia's national reserve is also shrinking rapidly, down to $55 billion from a peak of $183 billion in 2021. According to Aslan, the war effort alone could consume 10% of Russia's GDP in 2024. These indicators hardly suggest a healthy economy. The Hill goes further, predicting a potential Russian economic meltdown as soon as 2025, with growing immiseration and social discontent as war costs drain the last of Russia's resources. Infrastructure on the brink. What does this mean for Russia's future? Whether or not the war continues through 2025, Russia's coffers are so depleted that little remains to address the country's crumbling infrastructure. Average Russians face a cost of living crisis and soaring interest rates that make borrowing impossible. We already see evidence of collapse in Russia's deteriorating public services. Russia is still reliant on Soviet-era systems in dire need of investment. Investment now swallowed by war spending. Economist Igor Lipsitz explains that most infrastructure dates to the 1970s and 1980s, is badly worn out, and needs replacing. But that requires money, effort, and political will, resources channeled instead into Putin's special military operation. While Putin's envoy Anatoly Seryshev claimed that the president is personally overseeing infrastructure improvements, little concrete action is apparent. The Jamestown Foundation reports that Russia suffered 577 major incidents affecting critical infrastructure across 59 regions during the 2023/2024 winter, 31 of these in Moscow, Russia's wealthiest city. Annually, around 7,000 incidents disrupt the country's heating infrastructure. Adding to these woes, Russia's rail system is also under strain. After dedicating much of Moscow's railway fleet to moving troops toward the border regions like Kursk, many trains have been left abandoned. Sanctions make acquiring spare parts extremely difficult, leaving already aging tracks and locomotives even more vulnerable to breakdown. A nation losing its people. Putin's focus on the war has drained both Russia's finances and its most valuable resource, its people. In the first few months of the war, around 1 million skilled Russians fled the country, seeking to avoid the draft. Among those who stayed, over 720,000 have been killed or wounded in Ukraine, removing a significant share of working-age men from the labor force. Even before the war, Russia faced a demographic dilemma. The non-Russian share of the population stands at roughly 30%, and is growing faster than the ethnic Russian share. Around 70% of ethnic Russians live in urban centers and tend to have fewer children, meaning minority communities' birth rates surpass those of ethnic Russians. Moreover, years of conflict have instilled fear, deterring many from starting families. The risk of another mobilization, combined with economic instability, makes parenthood less appealing. In fact, Russia's birth rate hit a 25-year low in the first half of 2024, prompting a panicked reaction from Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, who deemed the situation catastrophic. The number stands at only 1.4 births per woman, a figure reminiscent of the post-Soviet collapse era. Despite this demographic crisis, Putin's policies aren't helping. Will the Russian Federation collapse under these mounting pressures, or manage to scrape through and possibly even emerge stronger?